Teresa.
I can say for the legislation passed for being able to stay in foster care until you're 21 does not apply to me. I am from Wisconsin, and through all of my research, because I did not go into the Minnesota foster care system, I am not eligible for being in foster care until I'm 21 here. And because I have come to college from Wisconsin, I'm not eligible for the stuff that's from Wisconsin anymore because I'm not living in Wisconsin. So that kind of puts me in a bit of a predicament. But I really wanted to go to Crossroads College. They didn't have that kind of a college over in Wisconsin, so, yeah.
You know, I think maybe one of the reasons we're here today is to come together over this issue, and maybe what we need to think through is, as a community, what can we live with in terms of homelessness? Are we okay with kids who are moving from couch to couch and spending the night occasionally on a park bench or behind Hy-Vee South in a tent? We have limited control over how the federal government's going to define this and how the state will. But as a community, perhaps this can be the beginning of us coming together saying, here's how we define homelessness, and here's what we won't tolerate here. That's why I'm very heartened to see this large of a group here today.
Mary, did you have something else?
Yeah, and I just wanted to make one other point too about foster care, and that's similar to the other institutions in our communities. Discharge planning has got to be a part of everything, every plan for every kid. We lose so many of them out of foster care, they end up homeless, we lose them altogether. But discharge planning is a way to prevent that homelessness from happening when they age out. So I think it's incumbent on us to require institutions to start stepping up.
I would agree with that. Not only is it because it results in youth homelessness, but we see it among the adult population that a high percentage of those folks had spent time in the foster care system. So,
Yeah, usually once you become homeless, it's very hard to get out of it, if not impossible because of the way the economy works today.
Well, and I would add to that, coming from the adult services side of things, is that there is oftentimes an expectation that the same level of service that was afforded to children, to people under age 18, that those services are going to be available in the adult services world. And unfortunately, the programs are often very different, that they get focused towards individuals who have disabilities, and so the access. So again, it is that discharge planning and connecting to the right community resources, and not being misinformed about what you might or might not be eligible for is really what's important.
Can I make one more point too? I just think that it's really very important if we're talking about what's acceptable. Doubled up is not an acceptable housing situation for kids. If you look at their success rate in schools or their physical and mental well-being, it doesn't matter if they're on the streets homeless or if they're couch hopping, they still have that same toll is taken. So.
That's correct, and I would add that we always ask, is it a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence? And like Teresa said, you could have a roof over your head, but that doesn't mean it's an adequate residence. And to be doubled up, I mean, think about, a two-bedroom apartment with one bathroom and 10 or 12 people. Sometimes it's a choice that we do know that sometimes is the case, but that has a lot to do with the family, especially when the ages range from maybe an infant or a young child up to a child in secondary, whether it be middle school or high school. So it needs to be adequate housing, not just housing.
Okay, so excellent discussion. We'll move on to the next question.
This question I'm going to start with Wendy. What is the one thing that can be done to be proactive in reducing the population of homeless youth?
I believe that one thing that can be done would be the early intervention, and in our case with the school system, it would be the identification and then the collaboration with the community agencies and pooling our resources to figure out how we can best serve each individual in each circumstance. Sometimes it might be a family, if we're looking at younger children, it might be how to work with the family, and sometimes if we're talking about usually our secondary students or our high school students, it would be how to link with no pun intended, but how to connect with Link and other programs and resources that are available. So I think it's about early intervention and then building that collaboration. And again, one of the challenges is we all have this data privacy that we have to follow. And so how can we get around that or get a family or a student to release information so we can really maximize the resources that we all have in the public school system? You know, I can't give out that data. You know, Corrine could call me or Mary could call me and ask me, you know, and until we have the family's permission, we can't disclose that. So that makes it very difficult too, because there's a big wall right here, and she knows and I know, and we can't work together. So somehow that needs to be a part of the conversation too.
One thing I'd like to add is it's hard to figure out how you're going to be proactive in addressing it unless you really know who these kids are in the first place. And there is some pretty startling data that the Wilder Foundation has come up with in 2 separate surveys since 2003, and it pretty much reflects national trends as well. See if you're not shocked. I was. Nearly 1 out of 2 homeless youth have been physically or sexually mistreated. Nearly 38% have been physically abused. 3 out of 10 have been sexually abused, 31% of girls, 22% of boys. 7 out of 10 homeless youth have experienced an out-of-home placement, that's 71%. 2 out of 10 have lived in a facility for persons with emotional, behavioral, or mental health problems. 4 out of 10 kids self-report as having significant mental health problems. 1/3 of homeless youth have considered suicide, 34%. 23% have attempted suicide. 17% of homeless youth and 25% of young adults, those are the kids 18 to 21 or 22, report needing to see a doctor about a physical health problem. Over 1/3 of homeless youth and 29% of young adults report at least one chronic health condition, which could be asthma, high blood pressure, TB, diabetes, hepatitis, or HIV/AIDS. I'm not saying that every kid who is homeless has experienced any of these or all of these. But I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of kids we're talking about have experienced trauma at some point in their life. So when you're thinking about, as Wendy talks about, the early intervention, the prevention, in order to address some of what these kids are reporting, the early intervention, the prevention is absolutely critical. The county is working very hard to provide assistance to children and families for whom chronic neglect of the children is a serious problem. We know that chronic neglect, research will tell us that the impact of that is as bad or in some cases worse than a child who ends up with a broken arm at the hospital. The parents go through counseling and it never happens again. So without that early intervention, if we can't pick these kids out in early childhood programs and in school programs and address some of the things that they have already had to experience by the time they are teenagers, I don't think we've got much of a chance.